The champagne flute slipped from my sister's manicured fingers and shattered against the marble floor of Rosewood Manor at exactly 11:23 a.m. on what was supposed to be the most perfect day of her life. But it wasn't the broken glass that made the wedding guests gasp in unison. It was the sight of 6 federal agents in dark suits forming a protective perimeter around me while I calmly adjusted my pearl earrings and smiled at the bride. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ma'am, we need to relocate you to a secure position, Agent Rodriguez whispered in my ear, his hand hovering near his concealed weapon as he scanned the crowd of shocked wedding guests. My sister Natalie stood frozen in her $8,000 Vera Wang gown, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, gasping for air. The same mouth that had so confidently told me just 12 hours earlier that I wasn't welcome at our wedding. The same voice that had declared I would ruin the aesthetic with my government job energy. If you have ever wondered what happens when you try to exclude someone who happens to have a Secret Service detail, you're about to find out. And trust me, it's better than any wedding entertainment money can buy. Let me rewind to where this beautiful disaster actually began. It started with a text message at 2:17 a.m., sent while I was reviewing security briefings in my apartment in Meridian Heights, the kind of luxury building that comes with bulletproof glass and background checks for the cleaning staff. I'd been working late, which wasn't unusual in my line of work. What was unusual was getting a message from Natalie at that hour. Change of plans, Cassandra. Family only tomorrow. You understand. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement that I was, in fact, family. Just a cold dismissal delivered through a screen at an hour when most people are asleep, probably hoping I wouldn't have time to respond or react. But here's what Natalie didn't understand about her big sister. When you work in national security, you don't just have a job. You have a life that operates on protocols, procedures, and the kind of planning that ensures the safety of people who make decisions that affect millions. And when someone threatens that careful balance, even family, there are consequences she never could have imagined. I stared at that message for exactly 37 seconds. Not because I was shocked. I'd stopped being surprised by Natalie's cruelty years ago. I was calculating, processing, running through the implications of what she'd just done, not just to me personally, but to the security detail that had been briefed on this event for weeks. You see, Natalie thought she was uninviting her uptight government worker sister from her garden party wedding in Willowbrook's most exclusive venue. What she actually did was create a security nightmare for a federal agent whose protection detail doesn't take days off just because someone's feelings got hurt. I picked up my secure phone and called Agent Chen, my detail supervisor. "We have a change in tomorrow's schedule," I said calmly. "The primary event location remains the same, but the family dynamic has shifted." "Ma'am?" Chen's voice was professionally neutral, but I could hear the underlying question. "The host has requested I not attend as a guest. However, I'll need to be in the vicinity for other reasons. I'll brief you in the morning." What Natalie never understood, despite growing up in the same house, despite sharing the same DNA, despite being raised by parents who taught us both about consequences and respect, was that I wasn't just her sister anymore. I hadn't been for a long time. 3 years ago, I had accepted a position that changed everything. Not just my career, but my entire existence. When you're responsible for national security at the level I operate, when foreign governments consider you a high-value target, when your work involves classified information that could reshape international relations, you don't just clock out at 5 and become a regular person again. I live with a protection detail, not because I asked for it, but because experts determined that my knowledge and position make me valuable enough to kill. It's not glamorous. It's not like the movies. It's a life where every restaurant is swept before you arrive, where your morning jog route is planned by professionals, and where family weddings require security briefings and threat assessments. But Natalie had always been wrapped up in her own world to understand mine.
To her, I was still just the serious older sister who chose briefings over brunch, who wore practical shoes instead of designer heels, who couldn't be bothered to care about flower arrangements and seating charts.
She never asked what I actually did, never wondered why men in suits occasionally checked our childhood home when I visited, never questioned why I couldn't talk about work or why I traveled with federal agents instead of personal assistants like her influencer friends. All she saw was someone who didn't fit into her carefully curated Instagram-worthy life. Someone whose job title didn't sound impressive at dinner parties. Someone who brought serious energy to events designed for showing off. So when she decided to exclude me from her perfect day, she thought she was editing out an uncomfortable family member. What she actually did was dismiss someone whose absence would trigger security protocols she couldn't even imagine. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was hurt. I'd gotten over being hurt by Natalie's choices long ago. I stayed awake because I was planning. You don't survive in my field by reacting emotionally. You survive by thinking 3 steps ahead, by understanding systems and leverage, by turning disadvantages into strategic positions. By 6 a.m., I had a plan that was both perfectly legal and absolutely devastating. Natalie wanted a family-only wedding. She was about to learn exactly what family means when your sister's family extends to include federal agents trained to neutralize threats to national security. She wanted to exclude me from her perfect day. She was about to discover that some people can't simply be erased from an event, especially when their security detail has already been briefed and positioned. The beautiful irony was that she'd created this situation entirely herself. All I had to do was follow protocol. And protocol, as Natalie was about to learn, doesn't care about seating charts, dress codes, or family drama. Protocol cares about keeping federal assets safe, regardless of whether they're attending a wedding as invited guests or, well, for other reasons entirely. The morning of her wedding, as I put on my navy blue dress and pearl earrings, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about doing my job. My job just happened to intersect with her perfect day in ways she never could have anticipated. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't emotional. Sometimes it's simply professional. And sometimes your little sister learns the hard way that you can't just delete people from your life when those people happen to be protected by the United States federal government. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Growing up, people always said Natalie and I were like night and day, which was ironic considering we were only 18 months apart and shared the same thick auburn hair and green eyes that ran in the Blackthorn family. But where I was methodical, she was spontaneous. Where I asked questions, she assumed answers. Where I planned for consequences, she expected someone else to handle the cleanup. Our childhood home in Clearwater Ridge was the kind of place where appearances mattered more than authenticity. Mother insisted on fresh flowers in every room, perfectly pressed linens, and family dinners where we discussed appropriate topics, which meant nothing controversial, nothing complicated, and certainly nothing that might make guests uncomfortable if they overheard. Natalie thrived in that environment like a hothouse orchid. She instinctively knew how to smile at the right moments, laugh at the right jokes, and ask the kinds of questions that made adults pat her head and declare her such a delightful child. She was the daughter who remembered to write thank you notes without being reminded, who posed beautifully for Christmas card photos, and who never tracked mud through the pristine white foyer. "Cassandra thinks too much," Mother would say with that particular sigh reserved for disappointing children. "Some things are simply meant to be accepted, not analyzed." But Natalie was different. Natalie was easy. She floated through childhood collecting accolades like pressed flowers. Most improved student in ballet,
sweetest smile in the church youth program, most helpful volunteer at the charity luncheon. She had an uncanny ability to sense what people wanted from her and deliver it with a bow on top.
I collected books, questions, and what our nanny diplomatically called intense interests. At 8, I became obsessed with codes and spent weeks creating elaborate ciphers that only I could decode. At 10, I read every book in the local library about forensic science after watching a documentary about crime scene investigation. At 12, I taught myself basic computer programming because I wanted to understand how systems worked from the inside out. It's wonderful that Cassandra is so academic, people would say, the pause before academic filled with the kind of polite concern usually reserved for discussing someone's unfortunate medical condition. The difference between us wasn't just personality, it was priority. Natalie prioritized being loved. I prioritize understanding why things worked the way they did, even when that understanding made people uncomfortable. This became particularly clear during what I now think of as the Great Piano Recital Incident of 2003. Natalie had been taking piano lessons for 2 years and was scheduled to perform for Elise at the annual spring recital. She practiced diligently, had a beautiful white dress picked out, and spent weeks talking about how proud everyone would be. The night before the recital, she came down with a stomach bug that left her pale, shaky, and definitely not performance-ready. I had been taking lessons for 4 years, but had never performed in a recital because, according to Mother, I played too aggressively and made faces when I concentrated. But I knew for Elise perfectly, probably better than Natalie did. Cassandra could perform in Natalie's place, I suggested at the emergency family meeting convened in our living room. Same song, same time slot. No one would have to know there was a switch. The silence that followed was deafening. "That's very thoughtful, dear," Mother finally said. "But Natalie has been preparing for this specifically. It wouldn't be the same." Father nodded. "Besides, people are expecting to see Natalie perform. They know her from church, from school events. You're more behind the scenes." Behind the scenes. At 11 years old, I was already being categorized as support staff in my own family. Natalie recovered by the afternoon and performed beautifully, receiving a standing ovation and a bouquet of roses. I sat in the audience, clapping politely, understanding for the first time that my role wasn't to shine. It was to make sure Natalie's shine wasn't diminished by comparison. This dynamic only intensified as we got older. Natalie's high school years were a parade of homecoming court nominations, student council positions, and weekend parties where she held court like a benevolent queen. She dated the quarterback, then the class president, then the heir to a local real estate fortune, each relationship documented in professional quality photos that our mother proudly displayed throughout the house. I spent high school in advanced placement classes, on the debate team, and in the computer lab teaching myself programming languages that weren't offered in our curriculum. I had exactly 3 close friends, all of whom were more interested in discussing political theory than party planning, and 0 romantic relationships, mainly because I found most teenage boys about as intellectually stimulating as watching paint dry. "Cassandra scares boys," Natalie once confided to Mother, apparently unaware that I was within earshot. Mother's response was swift and surgical. Perhaps if she smiled more and argued less, she'd have better luck. The assumption always was that I wanted what Natalie had, that I was somehow failing at being a teenage girl because I didn't prioritize popularity or romance. The possibility that I might be actively pursuing different goals, that I might find fulfillment in achievements that didn't require external validation, simply didn't register. When college acceptance letters arrived, the family celebration was focused entirely on Natalie's admission to Rosecliff University, where she planned to major in communications and join the best sorority. My acceptance to Georgetown School of Foreign Service, a program that admitted less than 15% of applicants, was acknowledged with a "That's nice, dear," and immediate redirection to discussing Natalie's dorm room decor. The pattern was so established by then that I barely noticed it. Natalie was the star, and I was the efficient support system that made her start impossible. When she needed help with homework, I provided it. When she wanted advice on handling a difficult professor, I researched solutions.
When she had social crises that required careful navigation, I became her strategic advisor. But the arrangement was entirely one-directional. When I needed support, academic stress, career decisions, the occasional bout of homesickness, I was expected to handle it independently. Cassandra always figures things out, became the family mantra, delivered with the kind of casual confidence that suggested my problems weren't really problems.
What I didn't realize until much later was that being the strong one in a family often means being the invisible one. Your needs don't disappear because you're good at meeting them yourself. Your feelings don't become less valid because you express them less dramatically. Your achievements don't become less significant because you don't require a celebration every time you succeed. But by the time I understood this, the family dynamic was set in stone. Natalie was the beloved, celebrated, protected daughter. I was the competent, reliable, low-maintenance daughter. And according to that logic, her wedding day was naturally more important than my feelings about being excluded from it. After all, Cassandra always figures things out. The real damage wasn't inflicted in dramatic moments. It accumulated in 1,000 small cuts, each one individually dismissible, but collectively devastating. Take my college graduation, for instance. I was valedictorian of Georgetown School of Foreign Service, a distinction that typically warranted family celebration and pride. I had spent 4 years maintaining a perfect GPA while completing an honors thesis on international cybersecurity threats, interning at the State Department, and conducting research that would later inform federal policy decisions. The ceremony fell on the same weekend as Natalie's sorority formal at Rosecliff. Not her graduation, she was still a junior, just a formal dance with a theme that year of Enchanted Garden, complete with rental gowns and professional photography. "We'll have to split up," Mother announced during our weekly family call. "Father and I will attend Natalie's formal, and we'll celebrate your graduation when we get back." I pointed out that my commencement was a once-in-a-lifetime event, while sorority formals happened twice a year. I mentioned that I was giving the valedictory address, that the Dean of International Affairs wanted to meet my family, that this was the culmination of everything I'd worked toward. "Cassandra, you know how important these social connections are for Natalie's future," Mother explained patiently. "Besides, you'll understand when you're older. Academic achievements speak for themselves, but relationships, networking, those require investment." The underlying message was clear. My accomplishments were solitary victories that didn't require witnessing, while Natalie's social successes were community events that demanded family participation. I gave my valedictory address to a nearly empty auditorium section reserved for my family. My roommate's parents took photos and cheered enthusiastically, making the emptiness more obvious. That evening, while I celebrated with classmates at a quiet restaurant, my phone buzzed with a group text full of photos from Natalie's formal. Our parents beaming in the background as she posed in a silver gown that probably cost more than my entire semester of textbooks. The pattern intensified during my early career. While Natalie was building her lifestyle blog and social media presence, I was working 16-hour days as a junior analyst at the Department of Homeland Security. My first major breakthrough came when I identified a vulnerability in federal communication systems that could have been exploited by hostile foreign actors. The discovery earned me a commendation and fast-tracked my security clearance upgrade. I called home, excited to share news that I was finally allowed to share. "That sounds very important, dear," Mother said absently. "Oh, did you see Natalie's latest post? She's been featured in Metropolitan Style magazine as one of the city's rising influencers. The photographer said she has a natural gift for this." Natalie's natural gift consisted of posing with expensive products while writing captions about self-care and authenticity. My natural gift involved preventing potential national security disasters. Guess which one got framed and hung in the family hallway? The most painful incident occurred during my promotion ceremony 3 years ago.
I was being elevated to a senior advisory position within the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, a role that came with a substantial increase in responsibility, security clearance, and yes, the protection detail that now defined my daily existence. The ceremony was classified, held in a secure facility with limited guest access. Each honoree was permitted to invite 2 family members who would undergo background checks and sign confidentiality agreements. The process took weeks, but I submitted both our parents' information, hoping that witnessing this milestone might help them understand the significance of my work. 2 days before the ceremony, Natalie announced her engagement. The timing wasn't coincidental. It never was with Natalie. Her boyfriend, Trevor, had proposed during a weekend getaway to wine country, complete with a photographer hidden behind nearby trees and a celebration dinner at the resort's most expensive restaurant. By the time I received the breathless phone call about the engagement, professional photos were already posted across all her social media platforms with a caption about unexpected surprises and fairy tale moments.
Within hours, Mother was calling to inform me that she and Father wouldn't be able to attend my promotion ceremony after all. You understand, sweetheart. We need to help Natalie start planning immediately. There are venues to visit, vendors to interview, and her future mother-in-law wants to meet us this weekend. I understood all right. I understood that a spontaneous engagement party thrown together in 48 hours was more important than a career milestone I'd been working toward for a decade. I understood that Natalie's happiness required immediate family mobilization, while mine could be postponed indefinitely. I attended my promotion ceremony alone, sworn in by officials whose names I couldn't mention to my family, taking an oath to protect national security while knowing my own family couldn't be bothered to witness the moment. The engagement period lasted 18 months and consumed every family interaction. Natalie's wedding planning became the center around which all other family activities orbited. Sunday dinners were devoted to debating flower arrangements, holiday gatherings turned into dress-fitting appointments and vendor meetings. Every conversation, every visit, every phone call somehow circled back to the wedding. My work, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly demanding and sensitive. I was leading a task force investigating potential cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, coordinating with international allies, and briefing senior government officials on emerging threats. The nature of my position meant that I couldn't discuss specifics, couldn't share victories or frustrations, couldn't even explain why I sometimes had to change our family dinner plans at the last minute due to security concerns. Cassandra's become so secretive, I overheard Natalie tell Mother during one of her dress fittings. She acts like she's saving the world, but she probably just pushes papers around all day. Government jobs are basically just bureaucracy with better benefits. Mother's laugh was soft but cutting. Well, some people need to feel important, I suppose, as long as she's happy. The dismissal stung, not because it was cruel. I'd grown accustomed to casual cruelty from my family, but because it revealed how little they understood about the person I'd become. They saw my career as an elaborate performance designed to compensate for my lack of social success, rather than genuine service to something larger than myself. During Natalie's engagement party, held at the Willowbrook Country Club with 300 guests, I was introduced repeatedly as Cassandra, Natalie's sister who works for the government, not as a cybersecurity expert, not as someone whose recommendations influenced federal policy, just as Natalie's sister with a vague government job. When people asked follow-up questions about my work, Natalie would smoothly redirect. Oh, Cassandra can't talk about her job. Very hush-hush. But tell me, have you seen the wedding venue we've chosen? The implication was always that my work was either too boring to discuss or too insignificant to matter. The possibility that I might actually be involved in classified operations that affected national security was never entertained because it didn't fit the family narrative where Natalie was the achiever and I was the awkward supporting character. The final straw came 6 months before the wedding, during what Mother optimistically called a family bonding weekend at the lake house in Millbrook. The weekend was ostensibly about relaxation and reconnection, but quickly devolved into an intensive wedding planning retreat with Natalie's various notebooks, fabric samples, and spreadsheets covering every available surface.
I had requested the weekend off from a critical project deadline, hoping for genuine family time. Instead, I found myself serving as an unpaid wedding coordinator, tasked with researching vendors, making phone calls, and solving logistical problems that Natalie found too stressful to handle herself. On Sunday morning, while I was on the phone with a florist trying to resolve a delivery scheduling conflict, I overheard a conversation between Natalie and Mother on the deck outside. "I'm worried about Cassandra," Natalie was saying. "She seems so isolated, so focused on work. She doesn't have any close relationships, any real friends. I wonder if we should set her up with someone from Trevor's office." "That's thoughtful of you, darling, though I'm not sure she'd be receptive. She's always been so independent, so determined to prove she doesn't need anyone." "It's sad, really. She's accomplished professionally, I suppose. But what kind of life is that? No romance, no social circle, just work and more work. I sometimes wonder if she's actually happy or just pretending to be satisfied with such a limited existence." The conversation continued, but I had stopped listening. They weren't discussing me with malice. They genuinely believed they were expressing concern for my well-being, but their concern was based on the assumption that my life was somehow deficient because it didn't mirror Natalie's priorities.
They couldn't conceive that I might find fulfillment in protecting national security, intellectual challenges, and work that mattered beyond personal gratification. They couldn't imagine that my careful boundaries around personal information might reflect professional requirements rather than social awkwardness. They couldn't understand that some people define success differently than likes, shares, and wedding photos. That weekend, I realized that my family didn't just misunderstand me. They had constructed an entire narrative about who I was that bore no resemblance to reality. And worse, they preferred that fictional version because it made them more comfortable than acknowledging the actual scope of my capabilities and responsibilities. In their story, I was the sister who couldn't quite figure out how to have a normal life. In reality, I was the sister whose life had become so significant that the federal government assigned people to make sure I stayed alive. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, delivered to my secure apartment building by courier, standard protocol for all my personal mail, which gets screened before reaching my door. It was thick cardstock with gold foil lettering, the kind of invitation that announces its expense before you even read the contents. "The honor of your presence is requested at the marriage ceremony of Natalie Rose Blackthorne and Trevor James Pemberton," it read, followed by details about the ceremony at Rosewood Manor and reception to follow. At the bottom, in smaller print, "Black tie requested, adults only. Ceremony begins promptly at 11 a.m. I held the invitation for a long moment, studying the elegant script and perfect formatting. Everything about it screamed Natalie. Beautiful, expensive, and designed to impress. What struck me wasn't what was included, but what wasn't. No personal note, no acknowledgement that I was her sister rather than just another name on her guest list, no indication that my presence held any special meaning. But I decided to try one last time. I called her that evening, catching her between what she breathlessly described as a crisis meeting with the florist and a emergency dress fitting. Apparently the bustle wasn't bustling correctly, whatever that meant. "Natalie," I said, "I got your invitation. It's beautiful." "Oh, good. I was worried the courier service might mess something up. You know how these government buildings have weird security procedures." I ignored the casual dismissal of the security measures that literally kept me alive. "I wanted to talk to you about the wedding. I know how much this day means to you, and I want to make sure everything goes smoothly." "That's so sweet of you. Actually, I'm glad you called. I've been meaning to ask, you're not planning to bring anyone, are you? I mean, I know you're not seeing anyone seriously, but sometimes people bring random +1s to weddings, and we really need to keep the guest count exact for seating arrangements." The assumption that I couldn't possibly have a meaningful relationship stung, but I pressed on. "No, just me, but I wanted to discuss logistics. My security detail will need to—" "Your what?"
She laughed, the sound tinkling like wind chimes in a storm. Cassandra, you don't need bodyguards at a family wedding. This isn't some international summit. I took a deep breath. Natalie, my protection detail isn't optional. They accompany me to all public events. It's non-negotiable. Oh. The silence stretched between us. Well, that seems excessive. Can't you just tell them you're taking the day off or something? It doesn't work that way. These are federal agents assigned to my protection based on threat assessments and security protocols. I can't dismiss them like they're hired help. Another pause. This is going to sound terrible, but would they have to be obvious? I mean, could they just blend in with the other guests? Maybe wear normal clothes instead of those intimidating suits? The question revealed so much about how she saw my life as a series of inconvenient choices I made to seem important, rather than the reality of my professional existence. They wear suits because they're federal agents, Natalie. That's their uniform when they're on duty. But it's my wedding, Cassandra. I've spent 2 years planning every detail to create a specific atmosphere. Having government agents standing around with earpieces and serious faces is going to make everyone uncomfortable. It'll look like someone's in witness protection or something. I understand this is your day, I said carefully, but this is my reality. I can't change federal security protocols because they don't match your wedding aesthetic. The conversation devolved from there. Natalie suggested I could sit in the back, where the agents would be less noticeable. She wondered if they could wait outside during the ceremony itself. She asked if I really needed all of them, or maybe just one agent could suffice for a family event.
Each suggestion revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of not just my security requirements, but the level of responsibility and risk associated with my position. She genuinely believed I could negotiate with federal security protocols the way someone might haggle over flower arrangements. Maybe, she said finally, her voice taking on that practiced sweetness she used when she wanted something. This isn't the right event for you to attend. I mean, if your job requirements are going to disrupt the ceremony anyway. The suggestion hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. She wasn't uninviting me, not directly. She was simply pointing out that my presence, my reality, my life didn't fit into her perfect day. Are you saying you'd prefer I didn't come to your wedding? I asked. I'm saying maybe it would be better for everyone if you found a way to make this work without turning my ceremony into a federal operation. I tried a different approach. What if we positioned the detail discreetly? They're trained to maintain low profiles. Most guests wouldn't even notice them. Cassandra, you're missing the point. It's not about whether people notice them. It's about the energy they bring. This is supposed to be a celebration of love and joy, not a reminder of whatever dangerous government stuff you're involved in. Whatever dangerous government stuff, as if protecting national infrastructure from cyber attacks was some hobby I'd picked up to seem mysterious. This is what I do, Natalie. This is who I am. I can't compartmentalize my identity to make your wedding more comfortable. And I can't redesign my entire wedding around your job requirements, she snapped back, the sweetness finally cracking. Some things are more important than work, Cassandra. Family should come first. The irony was breathtaking. She was lecturing me about putting family first while simultaneously making it clear that my presence was conditional on my ability to pretend I was someone else entirely. We ended the call with an agreement to think about solutions, but I already knew there weren't any. Not because the security protocols were inflexible, but because Natalie's vision of her perfect day required me to be invisible in ways I could no longer accommodate. 3 weeks later, I received another call. This time, Natalie's voice was strained, less confident than usual. I've been talking to Trevor and his family about the security situation, and we're all concerned about the precedent it sets. What if other guests start expecting special accommodations? What if people think the family is involved in something questionable?
Something questionable? You know what I mean. Government agents at a private family event, people will assume there's some kind of threat or danger. It might make everyone uncomfortable. I realized then that my family's embarrassment about my career had evolved into something more toxic: shame. They weren't just uncomfortable with my professional success, they were actively ashamed of the kind of success it represented. Natalie, I said quietly, are you embarrassed by what I do for a living? It's not embarrassment, it's just, why does everything have to be so complicated with you? Why can't you just be normal for one day? Normal. The word my family had been using to describe what I wasn't for as long as I could remember. Normal meant prioritizing appearance over substance, social comfort over professional integrity, family harmony over personal boundaries. I am normal, I said. This is my normal. These are the circumstances of my life, and they exist for good reasons that I can't explain in detail, but that you should trust me to understand. I don't know why you can't just take a vacation day or something. A vacation day. From being a potential target of foreign intelligence operations. From the knowledge that makes me valuable enough to kill. From the reality that my expertise in cybersecurity threats requires constant protection because the information in my head could destabilize international relations if it fell into the wrong hands. This is not a job, Natalie. This is a responsibility that doesn't pause for personal events. The final conversation happened 2 weeks before the wedding. Natalie called when I was reviewing intelligence briefings, her voice tighter than I'd ever heard it. I've made a decision. I think it would be best if you didn't attend the wedding. The words hung in the silence, like a verdict. I don't want government agents at my ceremony. I don't want the distraction, the questions, the drama. This is supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and I can't have it overshadowed by your work situation. My work situation. As if protecting national infrastructure from cyber attacks was some hobby I'd picked up to seem mysterious. So you're uninviting me from your wedding? I'm prioritizing my happiness on my wedding day. I'm sorry you can't understand that. I understood perfectly. I understood that after 31 years of being the accommodating sister, the flexible one, the one who adapted to everyone else's needs, I had finally encountered a boundary I couldn't cross. Not because I wouldn't, but because the federal government wouldn't let me.
I hope you have a beautiful day, Natalie, I said, and I meant it. When I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to pretend to be smaller, quieter, or less significant than I actually was. I was done trying to fit into spaces that required me to deny my own reality. After Natalie's uninvitation, something shifted in me that I hadn't expected. Instead of the crushing disappointment I'd felt after previous family rejections, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in my adult life, I was free to focus entirely on my work, without the constant background noise of trying to manage family expectations. The timing was perfect, because my career was about to take a trajectory that would fundamentally change not just my professional responsibilities, but my entire existence. 3 days after Natalie's final phone call, I received a summons to meet with Director Sarah Chen at the Department of Homeland Security's most secure facility in Quantico. The meeting was scheduled with the kind of urgency that meant either I was in serious trouble or something significant was about to happen. Director Chen was a legend in cybersecurity circles, the woman who had prevented 3 major cyber attacks on American infrastructure, including one that could have taken down the entire Eastern Seaboard's power grid. She was also notoriously direct, which I appreciated after years of my family's passive-aggressive communication style. "Agent Blackthorne," she said without preamble as I entered her office, "how familiar are you with the Meridian Protocol?" I knew enough to know I shouldn't know much. The Meridian Protocol was whispered about in the highest security clearance circles.
a contingency plan for protecting critical infrastructure and personnel in the event of coordinated cyber warfare. I'm aware it exists, ma'am, but I don't have clearance for operational details. She slid a thick folder across her desk. You do now. We're activating Phase 2 of Meridian, and you're being promoted to lead the task force. I opened the folder and felt my breath catch. The scope was staggering. A multi-agency operation involving NSA, CIA, FBI, and international partners. The kind of assignment that typically went to people with decades more experience and political connections I'd never bothered to cultivate. Ma'am, I'm honored, but I have to ask, why me? Director Chen leaned back in her chair. Because you found the vulnerability in our communication systems that no one else caught. Because you've been right about every major threat assessment you've submitted. And because you have something most people at your level don't have. You're not politically compromised. You don't owe favors. You don't have personal agendas. And frankly, you don't seem to care about credit or recognition. You just want to do the work. She paused, studying me with sharp eyes. There's one more thing. This position comes with elevated threat levels. You'll be briefed on specific risks, but the bottom line is that your knowledge will make you a high-value target for multiple hostile actors. Your security clearance is being upgraded to TS-SCI with special access programs, and your protection detail is being expanded. My current detail consisted of 2 agents who rotated shifts. The new assignment would require a full team of 6 agents working all the clock, plus additional surveillance and counter-surveillance measures. How expanded? I asked. Let me put it this way. You'll never be alone again. Not at work, not at home, not at the grocery store. Your apartment building will be secured, your communication devices will be monitored for your protection, and any public appearances will require advanced security sweeps. The weight of what she was describing settled over me. This wasn't just a job promotion. It was a complete transformation of my personal existence. I need to know you're prepared for this level of commitment, Director Chen continued. Once you're read into these programs, there's no going back to a normal life. Your personal relationships will be scrutinized, your travel will be restricted, and your daily routine will be dictated by security protocols. Some people find it isolating. I thought about Natalie's wedding, about my family's discomfort with my current minimal security requirements, about their assumption that I was choosing to be secretive rather than being bound by professional obligations. Director, with respect, I don't have personal relationships that would be significantly impacted by additional security measures. She nodded slowly. That might actually be an advantage in this role. The briefing took 6 hours. By the end, I understood why the position came with such extensive protection. The intel I would have access to could literally reshape global power structures if it fell into the wrong hands. I would be coordinating with assets in hostile countries, analyzing classified intercepts that revealed state-sponsored cyber attacks, and developing countermeasures that could prevent digital warfare from crippling American infrastructure.
I signed the papers without hesitation. The transformation was immediate and total. Within 48 hours, my apartment building was swept and secured. New neighbors moved in, agents posing as residents who could respond to threats in seconds. My grocery store, gym, and favorite coffee shop were all subjected to security assessments. My daily routine was mapped. Alternate routes were planned, and contingency protocols were established for every conceivable scenario. Agent Rodriguez was promoted to lead my expanded detail. During our first briefing, he explained the new parameters with professional courtesy, but unmistakable authority. Ma'am, from this point forward, we need advance notice for any personal activities. No spontaneous trips to the store, no unscheduled meetings, no casual social events without security clearance. I know it seems restrictive, but these measures exist because the threat assessment is real. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had always treated my career as an elaborate affectation. a way of making myself seem important. Now, I was so genuinely important that the federal government was restructuring my entire existence around keeping me alive. The work itself was intoxicating. For the first time in my career, I was operating at the level I'd always known I was capable of reaching. The problems were complex enough to challenge me, the stakes were high enough to matter, and the resources were sufficient to actually make a difference. Within 3 months, our task force had identified and neutralized 2 major cyber threats against American financial institutions. We developed new protocols for protecting critical infrastructure that were adopted by NATO allies. I briefed senior government officials whose names appeared regularly in international news, and my recommendations influenced policy decisions that affected millions of people. My family, of course, remained oblivious to any of this. The few times they called, our conversations felt like they were happening across an ocean of classified information I couldn't share. When Mother asked about my new position, I could only give the vaguest generalities. When Father wondered if I was finally making decent money, I couldn't explain that my salary was now classified information. The distance between my professional reality and their understanding of it grew so vast that communication became almost meaningless. They were still treating me like the same person who had struggled for their approval, while I was becoming someone whose approval was sought by people who shaped international relations. The social isolation that Director Chen had warned about didn't feel isolating to me. It felt liberating. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who understood the significance of my work, who respected my capabilities, and who treated my contributions as valuable rather than inconvenient. My colleagues were brilliant, dedicated professionals who spoke the same language I did: strategic thinking, systematic analysis, and commitment to something larger than personal gratification. Conversations revolved around solving problems that mattered, protecting systems that millions of people depended on, and staying ahead of threats that most people couldn't imagine. Agent Rodriguez became not just my protection detail leader, but something approaching a friend. He understood the weight of classified responsibility, the challenge of maintaining personal relationships when you couldn't discuss the most important aspects of your life, and the satisfaction of knowing your work made a real difference. "Ma'am," he said one evening, as we reviewed security protocols for an upcoming international conference, "I've protected a lot of high-value assets in my career: politicians, CEOs, foreign dignitaries, but I've never worked with someone who seems as comfortable with this level of responsibility as you do." I considered his observation. Maybe it's because I never had anything to lose. "What do you mean?" I gestured toward the secured apartment, the encrypted communication devices, the life that existed entirely within classified parameters. Most people in positions like this have to give up normal family relationships, social circles, spontaneous personal time. I never had those things to begin with. This isn't a sacrifice for me. It's finally finding a place where being serious, focused, and security conscious are advantages rather than character flaws. 6 months into the new position, I received the highest commendation available for civilian intelligence work. The ceremony was held in a secure facility with no photography, no publicity, and no guests beyond essential personnel. The citation was classified, so I couldn't share the details even if I'd wanted to. That evening, I stood in my secured apartment looking out through bulletproof windows at a city I was helping to protect. And I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete professional fulfillment. I wasn't the sister who couldn't figure out how to be normal. I was the analyst whose work prevented international crises. I wasn't the family member who made social situations awkward with my intensity. I was the asset whose intensity was so valuable that the federal government assigned 6 trained agents to ensure my safety. For the first time in my life,
I was exactly who I was supposed to be.
While I was coordinating international cybersecurity operations and briefing federal officials whose decisions affected global stability, Natalie was building what she proudly called her wedding empire. Her Instagram following had exploded to over 400,000 followers, all eagerly consuming her daily updates about floral arrangements, dress fittings, and vendor meetings. She had transformed her engagement into a full-time career, complete with sponsorship deals and affiliate marketing partnerships. The irony was breathtaking. As my professional responsibilities grew increasingly classified and invisible, Natalie's wedding planning became increasingly public and celebrated. Every family phone call now revolved around her latest brand collaboration or media appearance. Mother would breathlessly recount Natalie's features in bridal magazines, her partnerships with luxury vendors, and her growing influence in the wedding industry. "Did you see Natalie's spread in Metropolitan Bride?" Mother asked during one of our increasingly rare conversations. 6 full pages about her vision for modern elegance. The photographer said she's a natural in front of the camera. I was reviewing intelligence reports about potential attacks on European infrastructure at the time, but I made appropriate listening sounds while Mother detailed Natalie's latest triumph. "And Trevor's family is so impressed with how she's handling everything. His mother said she's never seen such organizational skills combined with natural grace. They're talking about having the wedding filmed for a documentary about luxury ceremonies." A documentary. Natalie's wedding planning had become so elaborate that someone wanted to make a film about it. "That sounds lovely," I said absently, my attention caught by a concerning pattern in the intelligence data. "Oh, and the most exciting news, she's been invited to speak at the National Wedding Planning Convention next month as a keynote presenter. They want her to talk about building your brand through your big day. Isn't that wonderful?" Natalie was giving keynote speeches about wedding planning, while I was giving classified briefings about preventing cyber warfare. Guess which one our family considered more impressive? The wedding itself had evolved from a family celebration into what can only be described as a corporate event with personal touches. Natalie had secured sponsorships from 12 different vendors in exchange for social media coverage and promotional opportunities. The ceremony would be photographed by a team of professionals, filmed by a documentary crew, and live-streamed to her followers who couldn't attend in person. Trevor, to his credit, seemed slightly overwhelmed by the spectacle his engagement had created. During the few family gatherings I still attended, always with my security detail positioned discreetly nearby, he often looked like a person who had proposed marriage and accidentally launched a multimedia production company. "Sometimes I feel like we're planning a corporate merger instead of a wedding," he confided to Father during one Sunday dinner, apparently not realizing I could hear him from the kitchen where I was helping Mother with dishes. "Natalie's just enthusiastic. She wants everything to be perfect." Perfect had become Natalie's watchword for everything related to the wedding. Perfect venue, perfect dress, perfect flowers, perfect weather, perfect documentation for social media posterity. She had spreadsheets tracking every detail, backup plans for backup plans, and what she called her dream team of vendors who understood her vision. The guest list had grown from the intimate family celebration originally discussed to nearly 300 people, including social media influencers, vendor representatives, and members of the local media. What had started as a wedding had become a networking event with vows. Natalie thrived in this environment like she'd found her natural habitat. She coordinated with vendors like a military strategist, managed her social media presence like a Fortune 500 marketing executive, and handled the press attention with the poise of a seasoned politician. Watching her operate was genuinely impressive. She had found a way to monetize her natural talents for organization, presentation, and social networking. The family was absolutely enchanted by her success.
Every conversation, every dinner, every holiday gathering now revolved around Natalie's latest achievement or upcoming milestone. She had become not just the favorite daughter, but the family's primary source of pride and social status. Everyone at the country club is talking about Natalie's wedding, Mother announced proudly during one of our monthly phone calls. Mrs. Pemberton says it's going to be the social event of the season. The waiting list for invitations is longer than some charity galas. A waiting list for wedding invitations. Natalie had created such demand for her wedding that people were competing to attend. And the economic impact, Mother continued breathlessly. The wedding planner told us that Natalie's event is bringing nearly $500,000 in business to local vendors. The mayor's office called it a significant contribution to Willowbrook's tourism economy. The mayor's office was tracking the economic impact of my sister's wedding. Meanwhile, I was tracking potential threats that could shut down the entire regional power grid. But that wasn't the kind of achievement that got discussed at country club luncheons. Natalie's social media presence had evolved beyond simple wedding updates into what marketing professionals call lifestyle branding. She posted daily content about her morning routines, workout regimens, skincare rituals, and carefully curated meals, all tied together with inspirational captions about living authentically and pursuing your dreams.
Her followers hung on every word. Comment sections filled with women seeking advice about their own weddings, their relationships, their career aspirations. Natalie had somehow positioned herself as a life coach whose primary qualification was successfully planning an elaborate wedding. The brand deals flowed in accordingly. Skincare companies, fitness brands, luxury retailers, travel agencies, everyone wanted to associate their products with Natalie's image of effortless perfection. She had created a full-time income from being professionally aspirational. She's making more money from her wedding planning than most people make at regular jobs, Father observed with obvious pride during one family dinner. And she's doing something she loves, something that brings joy to people. That's real success. The implicit comparison to my government salary, which couldn't be disclosed but was assumedly modest, was clear. In our family's value system, Natalie's monetization of wedding planning represented entrepreneurial success, while my classified Burke for national security was just another bureaucratic job. Trevor's family had embraced Natalie completely, treating her like the daughter they'd always wanted. Mrs. Pemberton frequently appeared in Natalie's social media posts, beaming beside her future daughter-in-law at various wedding-related events. The two families had merged seamlessly, united in their shared excitement about the upcoming celebration. Trevor's mother is just wonderful, Natalie gushed during one family phone call that I happened to overhear. She understands exactly what I'm trying to create. She keeps saying she's never had such a talented daughter-in-law. It's so nice to feel appreciated for what you bring to a family. The subtext was unmistakable. While I brought mysterious government work that made family gatherings awkward with security requirements, Natalie brought social status, financial success, and the kind of achievements that could be celebrated publicly. The wedding countdown became a family obsession. Mother marked days on her calendar, Father regularly checked the weather forecast for the wedding date, and every conversation included updates about final preparations, last-minute details, and growing excitement. Only 6 weeks left, Mother announced during our last conversation before Natalie's final ultimatum. Natalie's been featured in 3 more magazines this month. The venue coordinator says they've never had such an organized bride. Everything is absolutely perfect. Perfect. Except for the security-compromised government agent's sister who couldn't attend without bringing federal protection that would disturb the carefully curated aesthetic. The final straw came during what Natalie called her pre-wedding celebration week. 7 days of events leading up to the ceremony, each one documented for social media and attended by her growing circle of influencer friends, vendor partners, and media contacts.
There was the spa day on Monday, the bachelorette party on Tuesday, the rehearsal dinner on Wednesday, the welcome reception on Thursday, the bridesmaids' luncheon on Friday, and the family dinner on Saturday night before the Sunday ceremony. Each event had its own photographer, its own theme, and its own carefully planned social media strategy. I wasn't invited to any of them. Not because of a deliberate snub, but because my security requirements would complicate the documentation process. Having federal agents visible in social media posts would raise questions about why they were necessary, potentially disrupting the aspirational lifestyle brand Natalie had so carefully constructed. "It's nothing personal," she explained during our final conversation. "It's just that your work situation doesn't really fit with the vibe I'm trying to create. People follow me for inspiration and positivity, not reminders of whatever dangerous stuff is happening in the world." My work situation. The same work that was preventing actual dangerous stuff from happening in the world, but explaining that would require revealing classified information about threats she couldn't begin to imagine. So while I coordinated with international allies to prevent cyber attacks that could destabilize global financial markets, Natalie coordinated with photographers to ensure optimal lighting for her Instagram posts. While I developed countermeasures against state-sponsored hacking attempts on American infrastructure, Natalie developed content strategies for maximizing engagement with her wedding documentation. While I briefed federal officials about emerging threats to national security, Natalie briefed vendor representatives about maintaining her brand standards during the wedding coverage. Both of us were operating at the highest levels of our respective fields. The difference was that her field celebrated success publicly, while mine protected success secretly. And our family, naturally, was far more impressed by the success they could see, share, and brag about at social gatherings. The wedding had become Natalie's masterpiece, and everyone was invited to witness her triumph. Everyone, except the sister whose own triumphs were too classified to acknowledge and too complicated to accommodate. The intelligence brief landed on my desk on a Thursday morning, buried in a stack of routine threat assessments and security updates that crossed my desk daily. I almost overlooked it entirely, just another report about potential vulnerabilities at high-profile civilian events that might attract hostile attention. The header read, "Security Assessment, Rosewood Manor, Willowbrook, Elevated Risk Profile for Weekend Events." I stopped mid-sip of my coffee. Rosewood Manor. Natalie's wedding venue.
I opened the file with the kind of professional detachment I'd perfected over years of classified work, even though my pulse had quickened slightly. The report was thorough, as all our security assessments were, detailing the facility's layout, access points, surrounding infrastructure, and potential vulnerabilities. What I found made my blood run cold, and it had nothing to do with my sister's wedding. According to our intelligence, Rosewood Manor sat directly adjacent to a critical communications relay station that handled encrypted federal communications for the entire eastern seaboard. The facility was disguised as a cellular tower maintenance building, but it actually processed classified transmissions between government agencies, military installations, and international allies. More concerning, our cybersecurity monitoring had detected unusual electronic surveillance activity in the area over the past month, the kind of sophisticated signal interception that suggested foreign intelligence operations. The assessment concluded that any large gathering at Rosewood Manor represented a potential security risk, not because of the event itself, but because hostile actors could use the cover of legitimate activity to conduct surveillance or launch attacks against the adjacent federal facility. I read the report twice, my analytical mind processing implications that had nothing to do with family drama and everything to do with national security. The wedding was scheduled for Sunday. Today was Thursday. In 3 days, Natalie would host 300 guests at a venue that our intelligence services had flagged as a potential target for foreign espionage operations. I reached for my secure phone and called Agent Rodriguez. "I need an immediate security briefing about Rosewood Manor in Willowbrook," I said without preamble. "Ma'am? I'll have the details to you within the hour. Is this related to a specific threat?" Potentially. There's a large civilian event scheduled there this weekend that could complicate our monitoring of nearby federal assets. What I didn't mention was that the civilian event was my sister's wedding, and that I had personal knowledge of exactly how many people would be attending, when they would arrive, and how long they would stay. The briefing that followed was even more alarming than the initial report. The communications relay station wasn't just any federal facility. It was a critical node in our national cybersecurity infrastructure. A successful attack on that facility could disrupt secure communications between the Pentagon, CIA, NSA, and international intelligence partners. Our electronic surveillance detection systems have been picking up sophisticated scanning attempts. Someone is trying to map our security protocols and identify vulnerabilities. Agent Martinez from the Cybersecurity Division explained during our emergency briefing. "What kind of scanning?" I asked. "The kind that requires advanced equipment and significant technical expertise. This isn't amateur hour. We're talking about state-sponsored intelligence operations." Director Chen participated in the briefing via secure video link from her office in Quantico. "Agent Blackthorne, I need your assessment. Could a large social gathering provide cover for hostile surveillance or direct action against the relay station?" I studied the map spread across the conference table. Rosewood Manor's gardens backed directly up to the woods that concealed the communications facility. Wedding guests would be mingling in outdoor spaces less than 200 yards from one of our most sensitive installations. "Absolutely," I said. "A wedding reception with 300 guests would provide perfect cover. Catering trucks, vendor vehicles, photographers with professional equipment, guests arriving and departing throughout the day. It would be almost impossible to distinguish legitimate activity from potential threats." "Can we recommend that the event be relocated?" I almost laughed. "Director, with respect, you don't understand the kind of event this is. The bride has been planning for 2 years, has sponsorship deals worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and has built her entire career around documenting this wedding. She's not going to relocate because of vague security concerns she can't be told about." Director Chen was quiet for a moment. "What about increased security presence at the federal facility? Could we monitor the wedding activities without disrupting them?" Agent Rodriguez shook his head. "Ma'am, given the threat profile, we'd need a significant security perimeter. We're talking about a multi-agency operation, FBI surveillance teams, NSA technical specialists, military explosive ordnance disposal on standby. It would be impossible to keep that kind of presence invisible." "So our options are to shut down a major civilian event based on classified intelligence or allow a potential security vulnerability that could compromise critical federal communications." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. That's when I realized something that made my heart rate spike. I wasn't just an analyst reviewing this situation. I was a potential target who would be expected to attend this wedding under normal family circumstances. "Director," I said carefully, "there's something else you need to know. I have personal knowledge of this specific event." I explained in the most professional terms possible that the bride was my sister, that I had been uninvited due to security concerns about my protection detail, and that I possessed detailed information about guest lists, timing, and logistics. The briefing room was completely silent when I finished. Director Chen leaned forward on the video screen. "Agent Blackthorne, are you telling me that you have inside knowledge of an event that represents a potential national security threat and that you're personally connected to the organizers?" "Yes, ma'am. And you're not planning to attend because of family disagreements about your security requirements?" The irony was so thick I could barely speak. "That's correct." Agent Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if Agent Blackthorne attended the wedding, her security detail would automatically establish a protective perimeter around the event. We'd have legitimate grounds to position federal agents throughout the venue." The implications hit me like a physical blow. My presence at Natalie's wedding wouldn't just be awkward family dynamics. It would transform the entire event into a secured federal operation. Director Chen was already thinking 3 steps ahead. "Agent Blackthorne, if you attended this wedding, would your security detail have authority to establish protocols that would allow us to monitor potential threats to the adjacent facility?" "Yes, ma'am. My protection requirements would supersede any civilian event preferences."
And you said the bride specifically disinvited you to avoid having federal agents present. She said government agents would disrupt her aesthetic and make guests uncomfortable. Agent Martinez laughed once, a sound devoid of humor. She has no idea that government agents might be the only thing standing between her wedding and a major national security incident. The briefing continued for another hour, covering contingency plans, threat response protocols, and coordination between agencies. But the central question remained. How do you protect a critical federal facility from potential attack when the most logical security response would destroy the civilian event that's providing cover for the threat? By the end of the briefing, the solution was obvious to everyone in the room, even though no one wanted to say it out loud. Agent Blackthorne, Director Chen said finally, I think you need to have another conversation with your sister about wedding attendance. Ma'am? Tell her you've reconsidered. Tell her you want to be part of her special day. Tell her whatever you need to tell her, but I need you at that wedding with your full security detail in place. The beautiful irony was overwhelming. Natalie had spent months planning the perfect wedding, carefully curating every detail to create her ideal celebration. She had specifically excluded me to avoid the disruption my security requirements would cause. Now, those same security requirements might be the only thing that could protect her perfect day from becoming an international incident. Ma'am, she's made it very clear that federal agents are not welcome at her wedding. Director Chen's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Agent Blackthorne, your sister is about to learn that sometimes what you think you want and what you actually need are two very different things. I sat in my secure apartment that evening, staring at my phone and contemplating the most awkward conversation of my professional life. I needed to call my sister, who had uninvited me from her wedding to avoid government complications, and convince her to let me attend so that the government could use her wedding as cover to protect national security. The woman who thought my job was just pushing papers around was about to discover that sometimes those papers were the only thing standing between her perfect day and perfect disaster. I stared at my secure phone for 23 minutes before making the call. 23 minutes of weighing national security against family dynamics, professional duty against personal dignity, and the needs of the many against the feelings of one very self-absorbed bride. The decision should have been simple. Director Chen had made it clear that my attendance at Natalie's wedding wasn't a request, it was an operational necessity. The communications facility adjacent to Rosewood Manor processed classified transmissions that, if compromised, could affect everything from military operations to diplomatic negotiations. My security detail's presence would provide legitimate cover for the kind of comprehensive surveillance needed to protect that facility. But calling Natalie meant swallowing every ounce of pride I'd spent the last 2 months rebuilding after her dismissal. It meant pretending that her rejection hadn't stung, that I was suddenly overcome with sisterly affection, that I desperately wanted to be part of her perfect day. It meant lying to my sister to protect national security, which felt both completely justified and completely wrong. When she answered on the second ring, her voice carried that breathless excitement that had become her default tone whenever discussing wedding-related topics. Cassandra, this is such a surprise. I was just posting about the final flower arrangements. They're absolutely stunning. Did you see the stories on Instagram? I hadn't. I was too busy reviewing intelligence reports about potential threats to her wedding venue to scroll through social media updates about centerpiece coordination. Natalie, I was calling about the wedding. I practiced the careful neutrality I had perfected during diplomatic briefings. Oh. Her tone shifted slightly, becoming more cautious. I thought we'd settled that conversation. I know it seemed harsh, but I really think it's better this way. Less complicated for everyone.
Less complicated. If only she knew that her uncomplicated wedding was currently the subject of a multi-agency security briefing. I've been thinking about what you said, I began, hating every word I was about to speak. And you're right, this is your day, and I don't want my work situation to overshadow that. But I also don't want to miss my only sister's wedding because of professional obligations. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, she spoke, her voice carefully controlled. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe we can find a compromise. My security detail is trained to maintain low profiles when necessary. They could position themselves discreetly, stay in the background, avoid being photographed. You'd barely notice they were there. Another pause. Cassandra, we've been through this. Even discreet government agents would change the entire atmosphere of the event. People would ask questions. It would create exactly the kind of distraction I'm trying to avoid. I closed my eyes, reminding myself that I was operating under classified authority to protect assets she couldn't even imagine. What if I told you that I've found a way to minimize their visibility? That I've been working with them on protocols specifically designed for civilian events? This wasn't entirely a lie. My security detail did have protocols for civilian events. They were just usually protocols designed to secure the area completely, rather than blend into wedding receptions. You have? She sounded genuinely surprised. I have. And, Natalie, I really want to be there. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but you're my sister. This is the most important day of your life. I don't want to look back and regret missing it because of professional technicalities. The professional technicalities in question being the prevention of potential cyber warfare, but she didn't need those details. I could almost hear her internal debate playing out through the phone line. On one hand, she genuinely wanted family support for her big day. On the other hand, she'd spent months creating a specific vision that didn't include federal agents as wedding guests. How discreet are we talking? She asked finally. Completely invisible unless there's an actual emergency. They'll position themselves around the perimeter of the property, stay out of photographs, avoid interaction with guests. Most people won't even realize they're there. And you're sure about this? Because, Cassandra, if government agents start questioning guests or creating scenes, it will ruin everything I've worked for. The irony was staggering. She was worried about my security detail ruining her wedding, while that same security detail might be the only thing preventing her wedding from being ruined by an actual international incident. I'm sure, I said. They're professionals. They know how to handle sensitive situations. Okay, the word came out slowly, like she was testing how it felt. Okay, but I have conditions. Of course she did. They wear normal clothes, not those obvious suits. They don't carry visible weapons. They don't approach guests or draw attention to themselves in any way. And Cassandra, if anything goes wrong, if they cause any disruption at all, you have to handle it immediately and quietly. Agreed, I said, knowing that if anything went seriously wrong, handling it quietly would be the least of our concerns. And one more thing, I don't want to explain to people why you have bodyguards. If anyone asks, we tell them you work for the State Department and it's standard protocol for international travel safety, or something boring like that. State Department International Travel Safety. Close enough to the truth to be believable, vague enough to discourage follow-up questions. That works, I said. All right then. She sounded like she was convincing herself as much as agreeing with me. I guess I'll see you Sunday morning. The ceremony starts at 11, but photos begin at 10. So if you want to be included in family pictures, you should arrive by 9:30. Family pictures. With my security detail positioned strategically around Rosewood Manor's gardens, conducting surveillance of a potential national security threat while Natalie posed with her bouquet. I'll be there, I said. After we hung up, I immediately called Agent Rodriguez to brief him on the conversation. She agreed? He sounded surprised. She agreed, with conditions about visibility and discretion. Ma'am, you understand that if we detect any legitimate threats to the communications facility, discretion becomes a secondary concern. I understand, but Rodriguez, I need you to understand something too.
My sister has no idea what's really happening here. From her perspective, she's graciously accommodating her difficult sister's work requirements at her dream wedding. If we end up having to reveal the true nature of our presence there, it's going to destroy her. With respect, ma'am, if we're dealing with foreign intelligence operations against critical federal infrastructure, your sister's wedding concerns become relatively minor.
He was right, of course. In the hierarchy of national priorities, one woman's perfect day ranked considerably below protecting communications systems that kept the country safe. But she was still my sister. Still a person who had spent 2 years planning what she believed would be the happiest day of her life. Still someone who had no idea she'd chosen a venue that put her celebration in the crosshairs of international espionage. I know, I said. Just, if there's any way to handle this without completely traumatizing the civilian population, I'd appreciate it. We'll do our best, ma'am. But you should prepare yourself for the possibility that Sunday doesn't go the way your sister is expecting. The next 2 days passed in a blur of operational planning that felt surreal in its juxtaposition of wedding logistics and national security protocols. While Natalie posted Instagram stories about final dress alterations and bachelor party celebrations, I attended briefings about potential threat scenarios and emergency response procedures. Agent Rodriguez and his team conducted reconnaissance of Rosewood Manor, mapping sight lines, identifying security vulnerabilities, and establishing contingency protocols. They posed as grounds maintenance staff and catering delivery personnel, thoroughly surveying the property while Natalie's actual vendors prepared for the wedding. The good news, Rodriguez reported during our final briefing, is that the venue's layout actually works in our favor. We can establish a comprehensive security perimeter without being visible to the wedding guests. The bad news is that if someone wanted to use this event as cover for an operation against the communications facility, they've chosen their timing perfectly. Any update on the electronic surveillance activity? Still ongoing. Whatever they're planning, they're definitely using the wedding as a deadline. The scanning attempts have intensified over the past 48 hours. I reviewed the final security arrangements one more time. 6 agents from my personal detail, plus 8 additional agents from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, plus technical specialists from NSA, plus explosive ordnance disposal on standby. 22 federal agents protecting a wedding that the bride believed would be secured by discreet bodyguards staying out of photographs. On Saturday evening, as I laid out my navy blue dress and pearl earrings, the same outfit I'd worn to countless diplomatic functions, I reflected on the impossible situation I had maneuvered myself into. Tomorrow, I would attend my sister's wedding as both a family member and a federal asset. I would smile for photographs while my security detail conducted surveillance operations. I would make small talk with relatives while coordinating with intelligence agents monitoring potential threats to national security. And if everything went according to plan, Natalie would never know that her perfect wedding had been the cover story for one of the most complex security operations of the year. If everything went according to plan. I arrived at Rosewood Manor at exactly 9:15 a.m., 15 minutes ahead of schedule, which in security terms meant I was cutting it close. Agent Rodriguez had been positioned since 6 a.m., coordinating the deployment of what he diplomatically called enhanced protection protocols, but what actually constituted a full-scale federal surveillance operation disguised as wedding security. The morning was pristine, the kind of perfect September weather that wedding planners dream about and security coordinators view with professional suspicion. Clear skies meant excellent visibility for both photographers and potential threats. Light winds meant optimal conditions for electronic surveillance equipment. Comfortable temperatures meant guests would spend maximum time outdoors, exactly where they'd be most vulnerable and where hostile actors would have the best cover.
Natalie was in full bride mode when I found her in the Manor's bridal suite, surrounded by a tornado of white silk, makeup brushes, and what appeared to be half the floral arrangements in Virginia. She looked genuinely radiant, the kind of glowing happiness that comes from knowing you're living your perfect moment exactly as you'd envisioned it. Cassandra! She practically launched herself across the room, careful not to disturb her half-finished makeup. I'm so glad you're here. I was worried you might change your mind at the last minute. If only she knew that changing my mind would require overriding a direct order from the Director of Homeland Security. I wouldn't miss this for the world, and for the first time in our conversation, I wasn't entirely lying. And your people? She glanced toward the window overlooking the gardens where guests were beginning to arrive. Already in position. You won't even notice them. This was technically true. The wedding guests wouldn't notice Agent Martinez posing as a groundskeeper near the communications facility perimeter, or Agent Chen positioned as a catering supervisor with a direct line to the NSA technical team, or the FBI surveillance van disguised as a flower delivery truck parked strategically along the Manor's service road. What they might notice, if they were paying attention, was the unusual number of exceptionally well-built men in expensive suits who seemed to know exactly where to position themselves for optimal sightlines and quick response capabilities. But wedding guests rarely paid that kind of attention to security details, especially when those details were wearing boutonnieres and making polite conversation about the lovely ceremony.
The morning unfolded with the kind of choreographed precision that comes from months of planning, whether for weddings or federal operations. Natalie moved through her pre-ceremony routine with the efficiency of a seasoned performer. Hair, makeup, dress, jewelry, final photographs with the bridesmaids, each step documented by a team of photographers who had no idea they were also documenting the positioning of federal agents throughout the property. At 10:30, as guests began taking their seats for the ceremony, Agent Rodriguez's voice came through my nearly invisible earpiece. Perimeter secure, no unusual activity detected, all surveillance equipment operational. Translation: 22 federal agents were successfully masquerading as wedding guests, vendors, and staff while maintaining complete security coverage of both my person and the adjacent communications facility. The ceremony itself was everything Natalie had envisioned: elegant, romantic, perfectly orchestrated, and completely oblivious to the fact that it was being conducted under the protection of one of the most sophisticated security operations in recent federal history. Trevor looked appropriately nervous and happy. The officiant delivered a touching homily about love and commitment, and the string quartet played beautifully while FBI agents scanned the crowd for potential threats. I stood in the family section watching my sister promise to love and honor her new husband while simultaneously monitoring my security details communications and staying alert for any indication that our intelligence about potential threats was accurate. It was surreal in a way that my training hadn't quite prepared me for. The intersection of deeply personal family moments with classified national security operations. "The bride looks absolutely radiant," whispered Aunt Margaret, who was seated beside me and had no idea that the distinguished gentleman behind us with the excellent posture was Agent Thompson from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. "She really does," I agreed, watching Natalie exchange rings while Agent Rodriguez reported through my earpiece that electronic surveillance equipment had detected unusual signal activity in the area. The reception began at 12:30 with cocktails in the Manor's gardens, exactly 200 yards from the federal communications facility that processed some of the most sensitive intelligence transmissions in the country. Guests mingled happily, commenting on the perfect weather, the beautiful flowers, and the obvious happiness of the bride and groom. What they didn't comment on, because they didn't notice it, was the systematic way that certain members of the catering staff positioned themselves to maintain visual contact with all access points to the property. "Ma'am," Agent Martinez's voice was calm in my earpiece,
We're picking up increased electronic activity from the communications facility. Someone is definitely conducting active surveillance. I smiled and nodded at Cousin Jeffrey, who was telling me about his latest business venture, while processing the implications of Martinez's report. Our intelligence had been correct. Someone was using the wedding as cover to surveil the federal facility. The question was whether they planned to stop at surveillance. At 1:45, during the salad course, the answer became clear. Ma'am, we have movement in the woods adjacent to the communications facility. 3 individuals with sophisticated scanning equipment. This is no longer passive surveillance. I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed to check on something with the photographers, and moved toward the interior of the manor where I could communicate more freely with my security team. Rodriguez, what's the threat assessment? Hi. They're attempting to penetrate the facility's electronic defenses using the wedding reception as cover for the electromagnetic signature. We need to move to containment protocols. Containment protocols, which meant transitioning from discreet wedding security to active federal law enforcement operation, which meant revealing to 300 wedding guests that they were unwitting participants in a national security incident. Through the manor's windows, I could see Natalie at the head table laughing at something Trevor had whispered in her ear, completely unaware that her perfect day was about to become an episode of federal law enforcement. How long before we lose containment? I asked. Unknown, could be minutes, could be hours. But ma'am, if they succeed in compromising that communications facility, we're looking at potential intelligence breaches that could affect operations worldwide. I watched my sister pose for photographs with her new in-laws, her face glowing with happiness, and made the hardest professional decision of my career. Execute containment protocols, I said quietly. But Rodriguez, try to keep the bride from noticing for as long as possible. Ma'am, with respect, once we move to active containment, discretion becomes impossible. Through my earpiece, I could hear other agents checking in. Alpha team in position, Bravo team ready for perimeter expansion, technical team standing by for signal jamming. At exactly 2:17 p.m., as the wedding photographer was arranging the extended family for formal portraits, Agent Rodriguez gave the order that transformed Natalie's dream wedding into a federal security operation. All teams execute containment. We are now code red. Suddenly, the well-dressed men who had been blending into the wedding crowd were no longer blending. They were moving with purpose, speaking into communication devices and positioning themselves in ways that even the most oblivious wedding guest would recognize as law enforcement activity. The first person to notice was Trevor's uncle, a retired police officer, who immediately recognized federal agents when he saw them in action.
What the hell is going on? He said loudly enough for several nearby tables to hear. That's when Natalie looked up from her photographer's positioning and saw 6 men in dark suits forming a protective perimeter around her sister, while other similarly dressed men were speaking urgently into earpieces and moving guests away from certain areas of the property. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble terrace. And that's when my sister discovered that sometimes your family's boring government job turns out to be considerably more interesting than anyone expected. For exactly 12 seconds after the champagne glass shattered, the wedding reception continued in a bubble of confused normalcy. The string quartet kept playing, a few elderly relatives continued their conversations about distant cousins, and the photographer kept snapping pictures of what he assumed was just an unfortunate accident with glassware. Then Natalie's voice cut through the garden air like a blade. "Cassandra!" Every head at the reception turned toward the bride, whose perfect composure had evaporated the moment she saw federal agents treating her wedding like an active crime scene. Her voice carried a note of panic and fury that I'd never heard before. Not during our childhood fights, not during our teenage arguments, not even during our recent conversation about wedding attendance. I was halfway across the garden when she reached me, her designer heels clicking against the flagstone with the determination of someone whose perfect day was disintegrating in real time.
"What is happening?" she hissed, grabbing my arm with enough force to wrinkle the silk sleeves of her wedding gown. "There are men with guns surrounding my reception?" "Natalie, I need you to stay calm." "Stay calm!" Her voice pitched higher, drawing more attention from guests who were now openly staring at the bride, having what appeared to be a breakdown. "There are federal agents questioning my guests. Trevor's grandmother is being escorted away from the cake table by someone who looks like he could bench press a car." I glanced over and saw Agent Thompson politely but firmly directing elderly Mrs. Pemberton toward a safer position, away from the perimeter where other agents were establishing a security cordon. To his credit, he was being as gentle as possible with a 90-year-old woman who was clearly confused about why her grandson's wedding had suddenly resembled a presidential security detail. "Ma'am," Agent Rodriguez's voice was urgent in my earpiece. "We need to relocate you to a secure position immediately. The threat level is escalating." I held up one finger, the universal signal for, "Give me 1 minute," while facing down my sister, whose perfect wedding makeup was starting to crack under the strain of whatever combination of rage and terror she was experiencing. "Natalie, I need you to listen to me very carefully. There's a security situation that requires—" "A security situation?" She was almost shouting now, loud enough that several photographers were capturing what they probably assumed was just dramatic family conflict, rather than a classified federal incident. "You told me your people would be invisible. You promised they would stay in the background." "The situation changed," I said as calmly as possible, while watching Agent Martinez coordinate with what appeared to be an FBI tactical team moving through the woods beyond the manor's gardens. "We detected threats that required an enhanced response." "Threats? What threats? This is a wedding in Willowbrook, not some war zone." If only she knew how close those two things had become. Trevor appeared at her shoulder, looking like a man who had expected to spend his wedding day cutting cake and dancing with his new wife, not watching federal agents secure his reception venue. "Cassie, what's going on?" he asked, using the childhood nickname that felt surreal in the current circumstances. "People are asking questions, and honestly, we don't know what to tell them." Before I could answer, Agent Martinez materialized beside us, with the kind of smooth efficiency that comes from years of high-stakes security work. "Ma'am, I apologize for the interruption, but we need to move you to a secure location while we address the active threat." Natalie's eyes went wide. "Active threat? What active threat?" Rodriguez glanced at me, clearly asking for permission to reveal classified information to civilian bystanders. I nodded once, knowing that we had passed the point where compartmentalization was possible. "Ma'am, we have detected hostile surveillance of federal communications infrastructure adjacent to this property. Your wedding reception was being used as cover for what appears to be a foreign intelligence operation." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the string quartet seemed to sense the gravity of the moment and trailed off mid-song. "Foreign intelligence?" Trevor's voice cracked slightly. Like spies? "Like professionals conducting electronic surveillance of classified government communication systems," Rodriguez confirmed with the kind of matter-of-fact delivery that made it clear this was just another day at the office for him. Natalie turned to stare at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, betrayal, and dawning comprehension.
"Your job," she said slowly. "Your real job. It's not just pushing papers around some government office, is it?" "No," I said quietly. "It's not." "What do you actually do, Cassandra?" I looked around at the wedding guests who were now openly gawking at our conversation, at the photographers who were documenting what would certainly be the most unusual wedding coverage of their careers, at the federal agents who were efficiently transforming a social event into a security operation. "I work in cybersecurity and infrastructure protection," I said. "I analyze threats to critical national systems and coordinate responses to potential attacks on American interests." "And the men with guns?" "Are assigned to protect me because my work makes me a target for people who want to harm American security." She blinked several times, processing information that completely contradicted everything she'd assumed about my life and career. "Target," she repeated. "People want to hurt you?"
People want the information I have access to. Hurting me would be incidental to obtaining that information. Trevor was looking back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match conducted in a foreign language. So, when you said you worked for the government, I work for the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I hold a top-secret clearance with special access programs. The people you're seeing today are federal agents from multiple agencies conducting a coordinated response to protect both me and the communications facility that your wedding reception was inadvertently providing cover for. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Inadvertently? Natalie's voice was deadly quiet. You chose a venue that happens to be adjacent to critical federal infrastructure. Intelligence services detected that fact and were planning to exploit your event to conduct surveillance operations against that infrastructure. So my wedding, my perfect day, is being used by foreign spies? Was being used. My security team has now disrupted their operation. She looked around at her reception where guests were being politely but firmly moved into secure areas by agents who were no longer pretending to be wedding attendees. The elegant garden parties she'd spent 2 years planning had been transformed into what looked like a movie set for a political thriller. And you knew this would happen. This was the question I'd been dreading. I knew there was potential for security complications. I didn't know the specific nature of the threat until this morning. But you came anyway. Her voice was flat, emotionless. You came to my wedding knowing it might turn into this? I came because my presence here allowed federal agents to protect both you and critical national security assets. So you lied to me. I omitted classified information that you were not authorized to receive. She stared at me for a long moment, her perfect wedding makeup streaked with tears she was trying not to shed. My entire wedding is ruined, she said quietly. All those months of planning, all those vendors, all those guests who will never forget the day Natalie's wedding got raided by federal agents. Natalie. No, she held up her hand. Don't. Just don't. At that moment, Agent Rodriguez stepped forward again. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we really do need to relocate you immediately. The threat has been neutralized, but protocol requires securing all protected assets until we complete our sweep. Natalie looked at him, then at me, then at her wedding reception that had been transformed into a federal security perimeter. Protected assets, she repeated. That's what you are, isn't it? Not my sister, not a wedding guest, a protected asset. Natalie, the bride needs to be secured as well, Rodriguez continued professionally. Until we confirm there are no additional threats, all civilians in the immediate area need to remain in designated safe zones. Safe zones, Natalie laughed once, a sound devoid of humor. At my own wedding. And that's when my sister, the woman who had spent her entire adult life creating perfect moments and beautiful memories, sat down on the ground in her $8,000 wedding dress and started to cry. The image of my sister sitting on the ground in her wedding dress, crying while federal agents secured her reception, is burned into my memory with the kind of clarity that comes from moments when your personal and professional worlds collide with devastating precision. I knelt beside her, ignoring Agent Rodriguez's subtle gestures indicating that I should move to a more secure position. For the first time in my adult life, my sister needed me more than national security protocols needed my compliance. Natalie, I said softly, I'm so sorry this happened on your wedding day. Are you really? Or are you sorry that your security operation disrupted the event? The question cut deeper than I expected, because the honest answer was complicated in ways I couldn't fully articulate even to myself.
I'm sorry that you're hurt, I said. I'm sorry that your perfect day became a federal incident. I'm sorry that I couldn't find a way to protect both national security and your happiness. But you're not sorry you came. I considered lying, but we'd moved far beyond the point where deception would serve any purpose. No, I'm not sorry I came. Because if I hadn't been here, if my security detail hadn't been in place, those surveillance operations against the communications facility might have succeeded. And the consequences of that could have affected millions of people. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her foundation, but somehow looking more real than she had all morning. Millions of people, she repeated. And here I was worried about 300 wedding guests having a nice time. Around us, the security operation was winding down with the kind of efficient professionalism that comes from extensive training and clear protocols. Guests were being released from designated safe areas, though most seemed too stunned to immediately resume celebrating. The photographers were having animated discussions about whether they were allowed to publish any of the images they'd captured of federal agents in action at a society wedding. Trevor approached cautiously, like someone navigating a minefield he couldn't see. The agent said the immediate threat has been resolved, he said carefully. They're asking if we want to try to continue with the reception or if we should consider the event concluded. Natalie laughed, a sound somewhere between hysteria and genuine amusement. Continue the reception after federal agents just arrested foreign spies in the woods behind our cake table? They didn't arrest anyone, I corrected gently. They disrupted a surveillance operation and secured the area. The actual perpetrators were conducting remote electronic surveillance from off-site locations. Oh, well, that makes it so much better, she said with the kind of sarcasm she'd perfected during our teenage years. Agent Rodriguez appeared beside us again, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes showing genuine sympathy for the civilian casualties of our security operation. Ma'am, the area has been secured, and we've confirmed there are no remaining threats to the communications facility or to you personally. We can maintain a reduced security presence if you'd like to attempt to salvage the remainder of the event. Natalie looked around at her wedding reception, where guests were clustered in small groups having animated conversations about what they just witnessed. Some were taking photos with their phones, clearly planning to share the story of the wedding that got raided by federal agents. Others looked like they were trying to process whether they should be impressed, terrified, or offended. Cousin Jeffrey, who had always been the family member most likely to turn any gathering into a dramatic production, was practically vibrating with excitement. Cassandra, this is incredible! You're like a real-life spy! Do you carry a gun? Have you ever been to classified briefings at the White House? Can you tell us anything about what just happened, or is it all top secret? Jeffrey, I said firmly, almost everything about my work is classified. What I can tell you is that today's security response was necessary to protect critical national infrastructure, and everyone here handled the situation with remarkable calm. Father, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the entire incident, finally approached our group. His expression was complicated, pride mixed with concern, confusion mixed with something that might have been respect. Cassandra, he said, I think I owe you an apology.
Father, you don't. I do, he interrupted. All these years, I thought your job was just administrative work with better benefits. I had no idea you were involved in anything this significant. The word significant hung in the air like a revelation. For the first time in my adult life, my father was acknowledging that my career might actually matter. Your work, he continued, it really affects national security? Like, important national security? Yes, I said simply. He nodded slowly, processing information that completely reframed decades of family dynamics. Mother, meanwhile, was having what appeared to be combination identity crisis and social anxiety attack. She kept looking around at the other guests, clearly trying to calculate how this incident would affect the family's social standing in Willowbrook's carefully stratified community. People are going to talk, she said quietly to no one in particular. This is going to be the story that follows our family for years. Maybe that's not a bad thing, Natalie said unexpectedly. We all turned to look at her. Maybe it's time our family was known for something more interesting than perfect table settings and charity luncheon attendance. Maybe having a sister who prevents international incidents is actually something to be proud of. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they represented the first time Natalie had ever acknowledged that my achievements might be worthy of family pride. Natalie, I'm still angry, she said quickly. I'm furious that you couldn't find a way to tell me the truth, that you let me spend months worried about government agents ruining my aesthetic, when the reality was so much more important than that. But Cassandra, I'm also impressed, and maybe a little bit proud. Agent Rodriguez, who had been maintaining a respectful distance during our family moment, approached one final time. "Ma'am, if you're planning to remain at the venue, we'll need to maintain a security presence, but it can be significantly reduced now that the immediate threat has been resolved." I looked at Natalie, whose wedding dress was grass-stained and whose perfect makeup was destroyed, but whose expression had shifted from devastation to something approaching determination. "What do you want to do?" I asked. She looked around at her guests, her new husband, her family, and the remnants of her perfect wedding that had been transformed into the most memorable social event in Willowbrook's recent history. "I want to cut the cake," she said firmly. "I want to dance with my husband. I want to finish celebrating my wedding. Because if I'm going to be known as the bride whose wedding got raided by federal agents, I might as well own it completely." And that's how Natalie's perfect wedding became legendary for entirely different reasons than she had originally planned. 3 months after what became known in Willowbrook's social circles as the wedding incident, I received a text message from Natalie at 7:23 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. Unlike her previous communications, this one came with no fanfare, no dramatic timing, no strategic calculation about maximum emotional impact. "Can we talk? Actually talk this time?" I was in my secure apartment, reviewing intelligence briefings about emerging cyber threats, when the message appeared on my personal phone. The same phone that had been silent for weeks while my sister processed everything that had happened at her wedding and what it meant for our relationship going forward. "Of course," I replied. "When and where?" "Tomorrow. Coffee. That place on 5th Street with the terrible acoustics that nobody wants to eavesdrop in." Even in reconciliation, Natalie was thinking strategically about privacy. Some things never changed. I arrived at Grind Coffee 15 minutes early, a habit that had become second nature in my line of work. Agent Rodriguez was positioned at a corner table with a clear view of all entrances, reading what appeared to be a genuine newspaper while maintaining professional awareness of everyone in the establishment. The other patrons, freelance writers with laptops, college students with textbooks, retirees playing chess, had no idea they were sharing their morning coffee routine with federal security operations. Natalie entered at exactly 10 a.m., dressed in jeans and a sweater that cost more than most people's car payments, but looking more genuine than I'd seen her in years. No professional styling, no social media presentation, just my sister looking like she'd spent time thinking about difficult questions and had come to some conclusions. She sat across from me without ceremony, declined my offer to buy her coffee, and dove straight into the conversation with typical directness. "I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding, and I realize I've been angry at you for the wrong reasons." "Natalie." "Let me finish," she interrupted. She paused, stirring sugar into coffee she didn't appear to have any intention of drinking. "I should have been angry that I never bothered to understand what you actually do for a living. I should have been angry that I spent years dismissing your career as government busywork when you were actually preventing international incidents. I should have been angry at myself for being so wrapped up in my own world that I couldn't see how significant your world had become." The admission hung between us like bridge construction, tentative but potentially solid. "I should have trusted you when you said your security requirements were non-negotiable," she continued. "I should have asked more questions about why someone with a boring government job needed federal protection. I should have realized that maybe, just maybe, my sister wasn't trying to make herself seem important. Maybe she actually was important." I sipped my coffee, processing the fact that this was the first time Natalie had ever acknowledged that I might know something she didn't, that my perspective might have value beyond what she could immediately understand or categorize. "The thing is," she said, "I built my entire identity around being the successful sister, the one who figured out how to make money doing something I loved, the one who got recognition and appreciation for my work. And it turns out, while I was building a lifestyle brand around wedding planning, you were building a career that actually affects whether people live or die. Natalie, your work matters too. You create joy for people. You help them celebrate." "Cassandra, stop."
Her voice was firm, but not unkind. Don't diminish what you do to make me feel better about what I do. That's part of the problem. I spent years requiring everyone around me to minimize their achievements so I could feel special. That's not how families are supposed to work. Agent Rodriguez's presence in my peripheral vision reminded me that this conversation was happening under federal surveillance, that my personal relationships were now part of my security profile, that even family reconciliation occurred within the parameters of national security protocols. "There's something else," she said. "The wedding got coverage in every major publication on the East Coast, not because of my flowers or my dress or my careful planning, but because federal agents conducted a counterintelligence operation during the reception." "I'm sorry about that. I know the publicity wasn't what you wanted." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since before the wedding. "Actually, it was the best thing that ever happened to my business. Apparently, being the bride whose wedding survived a federal security incident is excellent marketing. My booking requests tripled. I'm now the go-to wedding planner for people who want memorable ceremonies with unique elements." Leave it to Natalie to turn a national security crisis into a business opportunity. "But that's not why I wanted to talk to you. I wanted to apologize for spending years treating you like the difficult family member when you were actually the family member doing the most difficult work. I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you, and I should have said that a long time ago." The words landed with unexpected emotional weight. I'd spent decades believing that family pride was something I'd never earn, because I couldn't compete in the arena where my family measured success. It had never occurred to me that the arena itself might be the problem, not my performance in it. "The other thing I wanted to ask," she said carefully, "is if we could start over. Not completely. I can't unknow what I know now about your work, and you can't unknow how I treated you before I understood it. But maybe we could try being sisters who actually see each other clearly instead of sisters who are always competing in different competitions." I looked around the coffee shop, at Agent Rodriguez maintaining his professional distance, at the normal people living their normal lives without federal protection or classified responsibilities or the weight of national security on their shoulders. "I'd like that," I said. "But continue in this warm, chatty tone, and as you continue, put emphasis on the following words: restrictions, security, travel, incidents, impressed, post-wedding, security, important, and different. But Natalie, you need to understand that my life comes with restrictions and complications that aren't going away. My security detail, my travel limitations, my inability to discuss most of my work, that's permanent." "I know, and I'm okay with it. Actually, I'm kind of impressed by it. My sister is so important to national security that the federal government assigns people to keep her alive. That's not a burden, that's an honor." 6 months later, I attended Natalie's first post-wedding event, a charity fundraiser she'd organized to benefit families of federal agents killed in the line of duty. The venue was thoroughly secured in advance, my protection detail blended seamlessly with the event security, and the guest list included several government officials whose presence required coordination with multiple agencies. But this time, when people asked about the unusually robust security measures, Natalie introduced me as my sister, who works in national cybersecurity and reminds us all that freedom isn't free. No apologies, no explanations, no attempts to minimize or hide the reality of my work. Just pride in having a sister whose job mattered enough to require protection. That night, as Agent Rodriguez escorted me back to my secure apartment, he observed that my family dynamic seems to have improved considerably. I thought about Natalie's charity work, about Father's new habit of asking thoughtful questions about international relations, about Mother's recent comment that having a daughter in national security was actually quite distinguished. "It turns out," I said, "that some people just need time to understand that being different isn't the same as being wrong." And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to choose between my family and my sense of self-worth, because finally, they were the same thing.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.